Why is rock so powerful? In the latest chapters, there was a crazy panel that I cannot stop thinking about. It's the exact panel when Rocks clashes with the King of Giants, Harold. And it was insane. I know it's an extreme hacky feat, but bro, think about it. On one side, you have a giant, not just a giant, but an ancient giant or a descendant of that race which are even bigger and stronger than normal giants. Just keep that in mind. On the other side, you have a man. He's not a normal man, he's a very powerful, unique man. But just look at the panel. The sword of Harold is like 3 or more times bigger than Rox himself, right? So the fact that Rox was able to stop that attack just opens a lot of doors and perspectives that we must take to understand how strong he is. Like, he's crazy strong, right? Because he had no devil fruit, he had no extra power besides his haki. And this is also a great way to understand how haki is so powerful, how haki is a real way to inflict damage. It's not just intimidation factor with Conqueror's haki, it's not just armament haki that allows you to punch a Logia type user, for an example. You can literally equal the power of a giant if your Conqueror's haki is on the same level or higher than a giant, for an example. And that's just crazy. That just shows the real most powerful element in One Piece. It's your will, because supposedly you cannot train haki. Born with your haki, you got what you got. But I think it's a different case actually. I think it's true. I think you cannot train your haki, but your haki is a physical representation of your will. So if your will grows or shrinks, your haki power will follow. I think that's the case with Moria, for an example, because we knew that back in the day, Moria would be fighting Kaido, right? In Wano, in Ringo. But after losing to Kaido, Moria's goals and perspective changed, and he went from being a pirate himself to wanting to just have a crew that wasn't even really a crew to do everything for himself. So his willpower literally shrink. That's why I think he didn't even hand the candle to Luffy. It's true that Luffy was Shadow Luffy, which is a different topic and super, super interesting. There might be a connection to something else about Shadow Luffy, but we'll see. But think about it, like if back in the day we had Moria fighting with Kaido, and then Moria loses to a pre-time skip Luffy that didn't even had Gear 4, no Haki for Luffy, nothing, maybe observation Haki because Luffy was always good at that. For an example, when he found out which was the real Mr. 3, when Mrs. Goldwick, if I'm not mistaken, painted the wax clones, and Luffy found out and is like, I'm always good at this thing. That already shows the observation haki from Luffy, right? And Moria lost to Luffy. So that means, like, in one hand, he was beating Kaido, so most likely he had haki, most likely he already had his shadow fruit, and then he loses to Luffy. So his haki got weaker because if it didn't, he wouldn't lose to Luffy. Now, going back to Rocks, he's insanely powerful, but how? How did he got so powerful? What training did he did? Where was he from? Well, we don't know anything about that just yet, but we know that his willpower is insane. And what is his will? Is to be the king of the world. And in a way, I think Blackbeard is also doing that, but in a different way, because he literally wants to be a king right now, he wants to be a part of the government. And if you think about it, Rox did it in a different way. First, Rox went through and he invaded Marihua, he invaded the Reverie, and he killed an admiral, which is an insane feat on its own, because I think it was never done before or currently as we are watching the events of One Piece unfolding. So Rox is a character on its own level. Would he be Roger level? We don't know, because we never seen Roger fighting a giant, we never seen Roger killing an admiral or invading Marihua on itself. I would say that most likely Rox was stronger than Roger, or at least in the same level. I don't know why, but I think Roger defeating Oden is not as a good measure of a feat as Rox clashing and holding his own versus Harold. And I think that Rox was holding back against Harold because he wanted a distraction, he wanted help in an indirect way to escape Marijuana. So if Rox right there destroyed the sword or injured Harold, he wouldn't be able to have that indirect help. Another thing about Rox is that he knew the potential and the power of Harold. And when he made his crew, he selected specific individuals. So it's like he really know what he was going for, right? That lets me think that he learned something when he invaded Marijuana because he knew, or the narrator told us, that there was something missing at that point, right? Oh, I just had an idea. Because when I was talking about that, I remembered Gunko being in her nun outfit, right? And if you think about it, Rox had nobody. Imu had Gunko, but Rox was alone. And then we know that Rox is a Davy Jonasian pirate, so he believes, he follows, maybe he is Davy Jones. But to perform a Davy back fight, you need a crew, right? That's what Davy back fights are all about. You in games, you bet crews, you bet crew members. But Rox could not use that power. He could not use that event because he had no crew members to bet. So he can't bet himself because he's the captain. I think in Davy back fights, captains are never playing. I think it's all about the crew. So Emu had one crew member, quote unquote, Gunku, right there, but Rox had nobody, and that I think that is what was missing. And that opens my mind to two perspectives. First, the Davy Jonasian perspective, which is I'm led to believe, I have no sureness about what I'm about to say, I have no evidence, but I think that the Davy back fight, the power behind it, is something that can go against the power and the modus operandi of Emu, because we've seen in Elbaf Emu doing Domi Reversi. That's kind of a way, a forceful way to do a Davy back fight. You take somebody else's crew member and now you turn it into your own crew member. And I think Davy Jonesian magic or power or ritual can do just that. And you can take somebody from Emu's influence by doing that. And that takes us to the next point, which is Emu needs crew members. Emu needs vessels. Emu cannot do anything by herself. Or maybe they can, but in a specific location, in Marihua. That's why they never leave Marihua. I think there is something special about it, and they must stay there. Now, if Emu needs vessels, imagine that Rox was able to do a Davy back fight and take Gunku, for an example, away from Emu. Emu couldn't do anything because you would need a vessel. I think that's really the point here. That's why I think Oda showed us really in our face that Rox is a Davy Bexian, Davy Jonesian, a worshipper of Davy pirate, because if you take through a Davy back fight Emu's vessels, Emu can't do anything else. And I think Emu even needs his vessels to use Domi Reversi. So if you take the vessels from Emu, he cannot create more vessels. Now, there is still a lot that we don't know about Domi Reversi and Emu's powers. Some people speculate that Davy Back is actually connected to Emu, but and this is important because maybe Emu can just do whatever he wants to do. He just chooses to use his vessels for a specific reason. But today we're talking about Rox and how powerful he is, right? And I think he's really, really powerful because his objective is kinda in the same line as Luffy or Gold Roger, where he's changing the world. Now we know Rox wasn't the best person. He was a bit of a scum, a bit toxic, but he wants to defeat Emu, and by defeating Emu, he brings freedom to the world. So that's the same goal as Luffy, being as free as possible. Yes, we don't know the real dream of Luffy, having the biggest party ever, worldwide party, right? It's not saying that the goals are the same, but the magnitude of the goals are the same. And that's why I think Rox is so powerful, because he wants to achieve something that is really, really world changing. It's so difficult and so far fetched that for you to actually believe and wanting to do that, your willpower needs to be so strong that you can clash with a giant. And just to finish the video here, something very interesting is the fact that Rox went into Marihua with no crew, while Blackbeard, he focused on getting a crew first. So Blackbeard learned with Rox that he needs a crew first to do whatever was that Rox wanted to do, which I really think he wanted to defeat Emu, sure, but he couldn't, and that's what is really interesting because he was in the room with him and he couldn't do anything. Why? Why couldn't he do anything? He had a gun, he had his sword. Yes, Goku was there, but Goku wasn't doing anything. She wasn't using any power. Emu was just like, Emu also knew. Emu knew that Rox couldn't do anything. So there is a common knowledge between those two characters. Rox knows he can't do anything. Emu knows he can't do anything. That Rox can't do anything. And Emu couldn't do. That's, I think, the most important point. Emu could not do anything to Rox. Otherwise, he would have done it and Rox wouldn't just escape very casually from Marijuana. So, whatever is going on here that we still don't know is also something that limits Emu. And I think that's very important. I think that might be more important than the Rox itself, himself, which is what he had or what he didn't have that stopped Emu for doing something, Because why didn't Emu fought Rox? Why didn't Emu defeated Rox? Why didn't Emu try to do something? Because what we see in those chapters is Emu just standing there, Bunku just standing there. They didn't do anything. Why? Actually, that's super interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Have you been introduced to the strongest character in One Piece? Or is Rocks a way to show us a limitation to Im's powers? Thank you for watching. Your support is greatly appreciated. I wish you the best, and I see you next time.